I never thought a snow shovel would become the catalyst for the biggest neighborhood war Maple Grove, Minnesota had ever seen. But here we are. It started on a January morning when 18 inches of fresh snow had buried our quiet subdivision overnight. I was outside at 6 in the morning, clearing my driveway with my brand new ergonomic snow shovel. The thing had cost me $90 at Home Depot, but my back problems made it worth every penny. The curved handle and reinforced blade made the work almost pleasant, if you could call any snow removal in sub-zero temperatures pleasant. That's when Gerald Patterson rolled up in his Mercedes SUV, window down despite the cold, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Gerald was our HOA president, a position he treated like he was running a small country rather than a neighborhood of 73 homes. He was 52, always wore a blazer even when it made no sense, and had the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Frank Daniels, that is one impressive shovel you've got there," he called out. I straightened up, feeling the satisfying lack of pain in my lower back. "Yeah, just got it. Makes a world of difference. Listen, I hate to ask, but my old shovel finally gave up the ghost. Snapped clean in half this morning. Would you mind if I borrowed yours for just a couple hours? Need to clear the walkway at the community center before the HOA meeting tonight." I hesitated. I'm not usually one to refuse helping a neighbor, but something about Gerald always rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was how he'd fined me $50 last year, because my garbage can was visible from the street for more than 12 hours. Or how he'd sent a formal letter when my grass was 2.5 inches instead of the regulation 2 inches. But it was cold, and I was raised to be neighborly, even to people who measured grass height. "Sure, just bring it back this afternoon," I said, handing over my new shovel. "Absolutely. You're a lifesaver, Frank. I'll have it back before you know it." He drove off with my shovel sticking out of his trunk, and I went inside to warm up with coffee. That afternoon came and went. No shovel. The next day, still nothing. By the third day, I sent him a text message. "Hey, Gerald, need that shovel back. More snow coming tomorrow." "Oh, right. Sorry, been swamped. I'll drop it by soon." Soon apparently meant never, because 2 weeks passed without a word. I called him directly. "Gerald, I really need my shovel back. That's a $90 shovel." "Frank, buddy, I understand, but you wouldn't believe the chaos with the HOA right now. Mrs. Henderson painted her door the wrong shade of beige, and we've got 3 violations to process. I'll get it to you." "When?" "This week for sure." Another week passed. The snow kept coming, as it does in Minnesota winters, and I was stuck using an old, terrible shovel from my garage that made my back scream with every scoop. I called Gerald again, and it went to voicemail. I sent emails. Nothing. That's when I got creative. If Gerald wanted to play business with the HOA, treating every minor violation like a federal case, then I could play business too. I opened my laptop and created an invoice on a template I found online. I itemized everything professionally. Rental fee for a premium ergonomic snow shovel, $90 value, at a rate of $15 per week. Late return fees at $5 per week after the initial 2-week loan period. And just for fun, I added an administrative processing fee of $25, exactly what the HOA charged for processing violation payments. I printed it on nice paper, put it in an envelope, and walked 2 streets over to Gerald's house. His home was the largest in the subdivision, a sprawling colonial with perfect landscaping even under the snow. I rang the doorbell. Gerald answered, still in a blazer, this time over a turtleneck. "Frank, hey, what brings you by? Your bill." I handed him the envelope. He opened it right there, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then anger. "Is this a joke? You're billing me for borrowing a shovel. You didn't borrow it, Gerald. You've had it for over a month now. That's a rental situation, and rentals cost money. I'm just following your example. The HOA bills people for violations all the time. Consider this a violation of neighborly trust. His face flushed red. This is ridiculous. I'll get you your shovel when I get around to it. You can't actually expect me to pay this. The payment terms are clearly stated. 30 days from date of invoice. I accept checks, cash, or Venmo. I walked away before he could respond, feeling more satisfied than I probably should have. When you live in an HOA-controlled neighborhood, you learn to appreciate small victories. The shovel did not materialize. Neither did payment. So the following month, I generated another invoice. This time, I added the previous balance, late fees, and another month of rental charges. The total was now approaching $200. I hand-delivered this one too. Gerald's wife, Patricia, answered this time. She was a sharp-featured woman with impossibly straight posture who served on the HOA board as treasurer. "Patricia, invoice for Gerald," I said, handing it over. She examined it with the same scrutiny I imagined she used on HOA financial statements. "You're billing my husband for a snow shovel. He's had my $90 shovel for 2 months now. The invoice is itemized and fair. I'm using the same rate structure the HOA uses for late payment penalties. This is petty, Frank. Then he should return my shovel. Pretty simple solution." She closed the door without another word. I went home and marked the invoice as delivered in my spreadsheet. Yes, I'd created a whole spreadsheet to track this. If Gerald wanted to ignore basic courtesy, I had plenty of time to be systematically annoying about it. March arrived, bringing the kind of late winter snow that feels particularly offensive because you thought you were done with this. I was outside with my terrible backup shovel when my neighbor from across the street, Tom Richardson, came over. "Hey Frank, I heard about your invoice situation," he said, grinning. "Gerald's been complaining about it at the HOA meetings. He's been complaining. He's the one who stole my shovel." That's what I said. "Half the neighborhood thinks it's hilarious. The other half thinks you're both being ridiculous. But listen, Linda saw your shovel in Gerald's garage last week when she dropped off some community newsletter stuff." My blood pressure spiked. "He's had it in his garage this whole time." "Yep, just sitting there with his other stuff." That changed things. This wasn't about Gerald being busy or forgetful. He was actively keeping my property while refusing to acknowledge my invoices. I went home and drafted invoice number 3. The total was now $315. I added a new line item for bad faith retention of property. This time I didn't hand-deliver it. I sent it certified mail, requiring signature. If we were doing this, we were doing it right. 2 days later, I received my first formal HOA violation notice in months. According to the citation, my fence had a loose board that needed immediate repair, and my mailbox post showed signs of weather damage requiring refinishing or replacement. The fine was $75 if not corrected within 14 days. I walked around my property examining both items. The fence board was barely loose, something I hadn't even noticed. The mailbox post had a tiny bit of paint peeling on one side, only visible if you were specifically looking for problems. This was retaliation, plain and simple. I fixed both issues that weekend, taking photos before and after for documentation. But I also added a new section to Gerald's next invoice for harassment and retaliatory code enforcement. I wasn't sure if that would hold up anywhere official, but it made me feel better. April brought rain instead of snow, washing away the last remnants of winter. The shovel was obviously no longer needed for its intended purpose, but that wasn't the point anymore. The point was the principle. You don't borrow something and keep it. You don't ignore someone's reasonable requests for their property back. And you definitely don't abuse your HOA position to harass them when they call you out on it. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening. Unknown number, local area code. Is this Frank Daniels speaking? This is Karen Whitmore from Whitmore and Associates law firm. I'm calling on behalf of Gerald Patterson regarding some invoices you've been sending. A lawyer. Gerald had actually gotten a lawyer involved over this. Those are legitimate invoices for rental of my property that he's refused to return, I said calmly. Mr. Daniels, my client disputes that any rental agreement exists. He borrowed a shovel as neighbors do. Your continued invoicing constitutes harassment. And his keeping my $90 shovel for 4 months constitutes theft. Also, using his HOA position to cite me for bogus violations is abuse of authority. Would you like me to get my own lawyer so we can make this official? There was a pause. Mr. Patterson is willing to return the shovel if you'll agree to stop this ridiculous billing scheme. The billing continues until he pays for the rental period already incurred. After 4 months, that's $640 by my calculation. Once paid, I'll consider the matter settled and he can return my shovel. That's absurd. Then I'll see you in small claims court. Have a good evening, Karen. I hung up, heart pounding. I'd never been in any kind of legal situation before. My wife Sarah thought I'd lost my mind when I told her about the call that night. Frank, it's a shovel. Is this really worth all this stress? She was curled up on the couch, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking at me with that mixture of concern and exasperation I'd been seeing a lot lately. It stopped being about the shovel when he decided to keep it and pretend like that was okay. Now it's about the fact that Gerald thinks being HOA president means he can do whatever he wants with no consequences. But $600, based on fair market rental rates and the actual HOA late fee structure. I did the research. If this was a rental company, they'd charge even more. Sarah sighed. Just don't let this consume you, okay? I know how you get. She wasn't wrong. I have a tendency to fixate on things, especially injustices. It's why I'm good at my job as an accountant, but it's also why I once spent 3 months fighting a $15 erroneous charge on our cable bill. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for mid-April. These meetings were usually sparsely attended, maybe a dozen people showing up out of the whole neighborhood. But Tom told me this one was expected to have a bigger crowd. Word had spread about the shovel situation, and people were picking sides. I decided to attend. I'd been to maybe 2 HOA meetings in the 8 years we'd lived here, but this seemed like the right time to show my face. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly got used for the occasional garage sale or summer barbecue. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly full. Apparently the shovel drama was the most interesting thing to happen in Maple Grove in years. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a table where Gerald sat with the 4 other board members. Patricia was there as treasurer, along with Nancy Foster as secretary, Robert Chen as vice president, and Margaret Sullivan as member-at-large. About 40 people filled the chairs, way more than had probably ever attended one of these things. Gerald's expression when he saw me walk in was priceless. His jaw actually tightened, and he shuffled his papers with unnecessary aggression. "Let's call this meeting to order," he announced, banging a gavel that seemed excessive. "We have our standard agenda tonight." First, Treasury report from Patricia. Patricia ran through the finances. The HOA had about $30,000 in reserves. Monthly dues were current from most residents, and they'd spent $800 on landscaping for the common areas. Standard stuff. Now, old business, Gerald continued. We've had several code violations this quarter that required follow-up. He went through a list of minor infractions. Someone's shed was the wrong color. Someone else had an unauthorized garden gnome visible from the street. Mrs. Peterson's front door wreath stayed up past Easter. "Are you going to address the shovel situation?" someone called out from the back. I turned to see it was Mike Torres, who lived on my street. Gerald's face reddened. "That's not HOA business. That's a personal matter." "But you're using HOA code enforcement to retaliate against Frank, right?" Mike pressed. "That seems like HOA business." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I'm not retaliating against anyone," Gerald said stiffly. "Mr. Daniels had legitimate code violations that were reported to the board." "Who reported them?" asked Sandra Kim from the third row. "That information is confidential," Nancy Foster supplied, reading from what looked like a rule book. "So you reported them yourself," Sandra concluded, "because you're mad about the invoices." This was going better than I'd expected. I hadn't said a word yet, but the neighborhood was fighting this battle for me. "Let's move on," Gerald tried, but Robert Chen, the vice president, held up a hand. "Actually, I think we should address this. It's causing division in the community, which is exactly what the HOA is supposed to prevent." "Gerald, why don't you just give Frank his shovel back?" "Thank you," I said from my seat. "That's all I've wanted for 4 months. You've been sending me bills for hundreds of dollars." Gerald shot back, his composure cracking. "Over a shovel, do you understand how insane that is? Do you understand how insane it is to borrow something and never return it?" I asked nicely. "I called, texted, emailed. You ignored all of it, so I applied your own HOA logic to the situation. You charge people for violations of neighborhood standards. I'm charging you for violation of basic human decency." The room burst into scattered applause and laughter. Gerald looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "This meeting is about community business," he tried again. "Then let's vote on it," Margaret Sullivan suggested. She was an elderly woman who'd been in the neighborhood forever, and she seemed to be enjoying this immensely. "All in favor of Gerald returning Frank's shovel immediately and settling this ridiculous dispute, raise your hand." Every hand in the room went up except Gerald's and Patricia's. "That's not how this works," Gerald protested. "You can't just vote on personal matters." "We just did," Margaret said cheerfully. "Give the man his shovel, Gerald. Good grief." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with multiple conversations breaking out at once. I made my way to the front where Gerald was furiously packing up his papers. "So," I said, "we doing this the easy way now? You've made a mockery of this organization," he hissed at me. "You made a mockery of basic neighborly behavior. The shovel, Gerald, tomorrow. Fine. But I'm not paying your ridiculous invoices. Then I'll see you in small claims court." I left feeling vindicated but also exhausted. This had spiraled so far beyond what should have been a simple interaction. But I was in it now, and my stubborn streak wouldn't let me back down. True to his word, or perhaps true to the public shaming, Gerald returned my shovel the next day. He left it leaning against my garage door while I was at work. No note, no apology, just the shovel. I inspected it carefully. It was fine, maybe a little dirtier than I'd kept it, but functionally intact. That should have been the end of it. But I still had those unpaid invoices, and the principle still mattered. So I filed a small claims court case against Gerald Patterson for the total amount of $640 plus court filing fees. The court date was set for June. In Minnesota, small claims court is designed for exactly these kinds of disputes under $10,000. I didn't need a lawyer, just my documentation and a clear explanation of my case. In the meantime, the neighborhood dynamics had shifted. I'd become something of a folk hero to the faction of residents who were tired of Gerald's authoritarian approach to the HOA. People I barely knew would wave at me, give me thumbs up, or stop to tell me stories of their own grievances with the board. But there was also a faction that thought I'd taken things too far, that I was being petty and litigious over nothing. Patricia Patterson led this group, unsurprisingly. She started a whisper campaign about me being difficult and lawsuit-happy, which was ironic given that Gerald was the one who'd threatened legal action first. The HOA meetings became must-attend events for the neighborhood. Attendance stayed high through May as people waited to see what would happen next. Gerald became noticeably quieter, letting Robert Chen run most of the meetings while he sat stone-faced at the table. Then came the June meeting, 1 week before our court date. I attended, as had become my habit. The meeting started normally enough with the usual reports and business. Then, during the open comment period, Patricia stood up. "I'd like to address the lawsuit situation," she announced, even though she was at the board table and could have just spoken normally. "Frank Daniels has filed a frivolous lawsuit against my husband over a borrowed shovel. This kind of litigious behavior is toxic to our community. I'm proposing a new HOA rule that any resident who files suit against a board member can be subject to fines or even forced sale of their property." The room erupted. Even people who'd been on the fence about my approach seemed shocked by this overreach. "You can't force someone to sell their home for using the legal system," Robert Chen said, looking appalled. "That's absurd, Patricia. Probably illegal too." "We have broad authority under the covenants to maintain community standards," she argued. "Yeah, community standards about lawn maintenance and fence colors, not about lawsuits," Sandra Kim called out. "This is retaliation, pure and simple." "I move we table this proposal indefinitely," Margaret Sullivan said. "And I further move that we review all HOA enforcement actions from the past year for potential bias or retaliation." "Seconded," Robert said immediately. Gerald had to call the vote, and he looked miserable doing it. 3 board members voted yes. Gerald and Patricia voted no. The proposal was tabled and the review was approved. After the meeting, Robert approached me in the parking lot. He was a software engineer who worked from home, about 40 years old, and had always seemed like a reasonable guy. "Frank, I'm sorry about how this has all played out," he said. "I didn't realize Gerald was being so stubborn about your shovel until it blew up at that meeting, and I certainly didn't know about Patricia's plan tonight. That was out of line. Thanks. I appreciate that. I really didn't want any of this drama. I just wanted my property back." "I know. Look, I'm thinking of running for president when elections come up in September. I've been on the board 3 years and I think it's time for new leadership. Would you support that?" "Absolutely. This neighborhood needs someone who remembers we're all supposed to be neighbors, not subjects in Gerald's kingdom." Robert laughed. "That's one way to put it. Good luck in court next week." The court date arrived on a Wednesday morning. Small claims court in Minneapolis was less formal than I'd expected from watching TV. No jury, just a judge in a regular courtroom. Gerald and I sat on opposite sides with a handful of other cases waiting their turn. When our case was called, we both approached the bench. The judge was a middle-aged black woman with an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and was not impressed by any of it. "Frank Daniels versus Gerald Patterson regarding unpaid rental fees," she read. "Mr. Daniels, you're the plaintiff. Explain your case." I laid out the timeline clearly. Borrowed the shovel in January, asked for it back multiple times, sent invoices based on fair market rental rates and the same fee structure the HOA uses. Shovel was finally returned in April, but without payment. I presented my documentation, including the invoices, text messages, emails, and a rental rate comparison I'd researched showing my charges were reasonable. The judge turned to Gerald. "Your response?" "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. He's my neighbor. I borrowed a shovel." "There was never any rental agreement. He can't just bill me arbitrarily months later." "Did you borrow the shovel?" "Yes, but did you agree to return it quickly?" "I said I would, but I was busy." "Did he ask for it back multiple times?" Gerald hesitated. "Yes." "How long did you have it?" "A few months, but Mr. Patterson, here's the issue. You borrowed property, agreed to return it promptly, then kept it for months despite repeated requests." While I agree Mr. Daniels' approach was unconventional, the law is clear that depriving someone of their property, even temporarily, has consequences. The rental fee structure he's applied is not unreasonable. However, some of these charges appear punitive rather than compensatory. She reviewed my invoices more carefully. "I'm awarding Mr. Daniels $300 to cover the rental value of his property and the inconvenience of being without it for 4 months. The punitive fees and harassment charges are dismissed. Court costs are split between both parties. And may I suggest you two figure out how to live in the same neighborhood without dragging the court system into it." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. Gerald said nothing, his face tight with anger. $300 wasn't the full amount, but it was vindication. The court had agreed that Gerald was in the wrong, that my approach had merit, and that actions have consequences. Outside the courthouse, Gerald finally spoke to me. "I hope you're satisfied. You've humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood over a shovel." I asked for it back. "That's all I ever wanted. You made this into what it became. You could have just let it go." "So could you? You could have walked it back to my house any time in those 4 months. You chose not to." "Why?" He didn't answer, just walked to his car and drove away. The check arrived 2 weeks later, exactly $300 as ordered. I deposited it and considered the matter closed. But the ripples kept spreading. The HOA board review that Margaret had proposed revealed some uncomfortable truths. Over the past 3 years, Gerald had issued 47 code violations. Of those, 31 were to just 12 residents, people who had questioned board decisions or spoken up at meetings. The pattern was clear enough that even people who'd supported Gerald had to admit it looked bad. By July, there was a petition circulating to recall Gerald as president before the September elections. I didn't organize it, but I signed it. So did 63 other households, which was well over the majority needed. Rather than face the recall process, Gerald resigned in early August. He sent a terse email to the neighborhood list explaining that he no longer had time for the position due to work commitments. Nobody believed that, but nobody really cared about the excuse either. Robert Chen became interim president and immediately changed the tone. Code enforcement became reasonable rather than punitive. The board started asking for community input rather than handing down edicts. The meetings became boring again, which everyone agreed was exactly how HOA meetings should be. As for Gerald and Patricia, they kept to themselves. I'd see them occasionally, driving past or checking their mail, but we didn't speak. The awkwardness was thick enough to cut, but that was fine with me. September brought the official elections. Robert ran for president unopposed. Sandra Kim joined the board as treasurer, replacing Patricia, who chose not to run for re-election. The neighborhood voted in several other new faces, people who wanted to serve the community rather than rule it. One evening in late September, I was in my garage organizing tools when Gerald appeared in my driveway. I froze, not sure what to expect. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "For keeping your shovel, for retaliating with code violations, for all of it. You were right and I was wrong. I let the position go to my head and I treated you and a lot of other people poorly." I set down the rake I was holding. "I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I didn't set out to humiliate you or cost you the position. I really just wanted my shovel back. I know. I was being stubborn and petty, and then my pride wouldn't let me back down. Patricia kept telling me I was right, that you were the problem, and I listened to that instead of doing the obvious thing and giving back your property." He shook his head. "I made a $90 shovel into a war. We both played our parts in escalating it. Yeah, but I started it. Anyway, I wanted you to know I'm sorry. We're thinking of moving. Too awkward here now, but I didn't want to leave with this hanging over us." We shook hands and he left. I never saw him at another HOA meeting, though he and Patricia didn't move right away. Eventually, in early November, a for sale sign went up in their yard. By December, they were gone. The new family who moved in were younger, with 2 small kids who loved building snowmen in the yard. They borrowed my snow shovel one day in January, almost a year after this whole thing started. I lent it without hesitation, and they returned it the same afternoon with a plate of cookies and a thank you note. That's how it should work. The neighborhood settled into a new normal under Robert's leadership. The HOA focused on actual community building, like organizing a summer block party and a winter holiday lights contest. Code enforcement still happened, but fairly and with warnings before fines. People stopped dreading their mail or avoiding meetings. I went back to my normal life of work, family, and occasional snow removal with my well-traveled shovel. Sarah was relieved that I'd found closure and moved on, though she still brings up the whole saga when she wants to tease me about my stubborn streak. The story became neighborhood legend, though. New residents get told about the Great Shovel War of 2025 as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and neighborly conflict. Some details get exaggerated in the retelling, but the core lesson remains. Return what you borrow, and don't abuse whatever small authority you're given. I learned some things too, though I'm not entirely sure they are the lessons Sarah wanted me to learn. I learned that standing up for yourself matters, even in small things. I learned that communities have breaking points where enough people decide to push back against bad leadership. And I learned that I'm definitely the kind of person who will turn a borrowed shovel into a federal case if the principle is important enough. But mostly, I learned to be very clear about loan terms before lending anything valuable. These days, if someone wants to borrow something, I write down the date and expected return date. I take a photo. I send a follow-up text confirming the agreement. Is it a bit much? Maybe. But it prevents misunderstandings and ensures everyone is on the same page. The shovel itself sits in my garage, a bit worn now from 2 winters of heavy use. Every time I see it, I think about the chaos it caused and feel a weird mixture of embarrassment and satisfaction. Embarrassment that I let things escalate so far over such a simple object. Satisfaction that I stood my ground and exposed real problems in how our community was being run. Tom Richardson still jokes about it when he sees me. "Hey Frank, you want to borrow my leaf blower? I'll draft a contract." He thinks he's hilarious. He's not wrong, though. The neighborhood will probably never let me live this down, and I'm okay with that. Better to be known as the guy who fought back than the guy who let himself get walked over. The other lasting impact is that our HOA is now held up as an example in the surrounding neighborhoods of what happens when leadership forgets it serves the community, not the other way around. People from other subdivisions mention hearing about what happened here, usually with some mixture of amusement and respect. A couple of other HOA presidents in the area quietly resigned after their own residents started questioning patterns of enforcement, similar to what Gerald had been doing. So maybe the Great Shovel War accomplished something beyond just getting my property back and vindicating my stubbornness. Maybe it reminded a bunch of people in Maple Grove, and beyond that, homeowners associations work for the homeowners, not the reverse. That boards need accountability. That small abuses of power are still abuses and deserve to be called out. Or maybe I'm overthinking it, and it was just a ridiculous neighborhood drama over a snow shovel. Both things can be true. Winter rolled around again, bringing fresh snow to Minnesota. I was out early one morning, clearing my driveway with my infamous shovel, when the new neighbor from 2 houses down walked over. His name was Dave Mitchell, and he'd moved in just after Christmas. "Hey, Frank, sorry to bother you, but my shovel broke. Any chance I could borrow yours for just an hour to clear my walk?" I looked at him, at the shovel, at the snow falling gently around us. Sarah's words echoed in my head about not letting things consume me, about learning when to let go. "Sure," I said, handing it over. "Just bring it back when you're done." "Absolutely. Thanks so much, man. I'll have it back before lunch." He returned it 90 minutes later, exactly as promised, and that was that. No drama, no invoices, no court dates, just neighbors helping neighbors the way it's supposed to work. Though I did take a photo of him walking away with it, and I did send a text confirming the return time, and I did write it in my calendar. Some habits die hard. The shovel and I have been through a lot together. We've cleared countless driveways, sparked a neighborhood revolution, inspired an HOA restructuring, and appeared as evidence in small claims court. Not bad for a $90 ergonomic snow shovel from Home Depot. Sometimes I think about getting a new one, something without all the baggage and history. But then, I remember what this shovel represents beyond its function. It represents the moment I decided my property rights mattered. The moment a neighborhood decided its leadership needed accountability. The moment Gerald Patterson learned that being president doesn't make you king. So the shovel stays, sitting in my garage between the rakes and the lawn mower, waiting for the next snowfall. It's just a tool, curved handle and reinforced blade, designed to move snow with minimal back strain. But it's also a reminder that sometimes the smallest things become symbols of much bigger issues, and that standing up for yourself, even in ways that seem petty or stubborn, can matter more than you think. And if Gerald Patterson ever needs to borrow a shovel again, wherever he's living now, I hope he remembers to return it promptly. For his sake, and for the sake of his new neighbors who might not be as patient as I was for those first few weeks, who might not wait months before sending invoices, who might not give him multiple chances before taking action. Or maybe he's learned his lesson and has become the kind of person who respects other people's property and time. People can change, after all. I like to think he's out there somewhere being a better neighbor than he was here. That our absurd conflict taught him something valuable about basic human decency and the importance of following through on commitments, no matter how small. As for me, I'm just a guy in Minnesota with a snow shovel, a patient wife, and a story that gets better every time Tom Richardson tells it at neighborhood barbecues. The invoice templates are still on my computer, just in case, but I haven't had to use them again. The HOA is running smoothly under Robert's level-headed leadership. The neighborhood is actually a community now, rather than a collection of houses living under a petty dictatorship. And every time it snows, I grab my shovel, head outside into the cold, and clear my driveway with a tool that once changed everything. The ergonomic handle still saves my back. The reinforced blade still moves snow efficiently. And I still appreciate that I spent $90 on quality equipment that does its job well. I just appreciate even more that it came back home, that justice was served, and that a neighborhood learned to stand up for itself. All because I decided to bill a man for keeping my shovel, and I refused to back down when he tried to use his authority to make me. Best $90 I ever spent, and the $300 court judgment was just a bonus. The real payoff was watching an entire community remember that they had power too, that they could push back against unfairness, and that sometimes the most ridiculous battle is the one most worth fighting. The snow keeps falling in Minnesota, as it always does, and I keep clearing it with my faithful shovel, and life goes on in Maple Grove. Just with better leadership, fairer enforcement, and one legendary story about the winter when everything changed because of a borrowed tool that should have been returned but wasn't. And that's exactly how I'll tell it to anyone who asks, for as long as people keep asking. Because some stories deserve to be told, even the ridiculous ones. Especially the ridiculous ones. Those are usually the most honest about human nature and what happens when principles collide with pride in a quiet Minnesota subdivision where everyone thought nothing interesting ever happened. Until it did.